Good evening, dwellers upon the internet, those of you who lurk in the interwebs between the comments and the minimize buttons. We welcome you.
Hello, hello, hello.
Indeed, and if Andrew stops clicking on the wrong windows, we can get this started. There we go. Good evening. So today we ask you to step into a great dialogue. The dialogue of character building and development. So, Matt, what inspired this idea for us?
Okay, this is going to be predictable, but it was J.G. Keely and his series on building strong female characters, and I think it's broad enough to include male characters too, but he had a lot of good points.
Okay, and was the idea for this brought on by my epic rant 2 episodes ago?
I think it was kind of maybe from your one from about female characters from a couple even more episodes
The
ago.
one the one that we cut and the one that we cut and then it came back in a much shorter form later.
Yeah, the
Yes,
one we shot when I was in Delaware.
yes. I know each of us is gonna try and talk about it differently. I mean, I think we definitely do have different perspectives. I think just based on our personal experiences, we're gonna have different outcomes to at least in this way. So
Even though, like, I personally, I haven't written probably as much as you have.
yeah, and I have studied more literary writing
Oh, definitely, yeah.
yeah as an art and practice it more, where you have practiced cinematographic
Screenwriting,
was that
screenwriting,
screenwriting.
screenwriting.
That's yes, writing as a art form, and you have also widely read one school of criticism, whereas I kind of have sampled many
Yes, the School of J.G.
schools.
Keeley.
Yes, and I have sampled many other ones very shallowly. So, shallowly? Yes. So we shall see where
Yeah, I'm,
the
I'm more theory, honestly.
yeah. So we should let's see where this leads. So, well, so what do you think? Like, who do you think is like maybe I don't know where to start with saying who do you think is a good character to talk about, or what do you think is a good process to talk about? Like, would you rather talk about the character or the process?
Character in general. Well, I thought. Well, what kind of notes do you have?
What was that?
What kind of notes do you have?
I have all kinds of notes. Like I have all kinds of notes
Oh,
just from experience. So like I'm comfortable to go
um.
either way, but
Well, you can go first because like you're more well written than I am.
okay.
Well
So
read, well written.
my um my thinking was that it would be more an approach to the process of character, but as I kind of thought that's what we were going to talk
Rather,
about.
like how you get into the mode and mood to do
Yeah,
so. Okay, I
yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Okay. So so the way I'm thinking is that for every author, there isn't necessarily the exact same way to build a character. Because some characters honestly do write themselves. Some
Oh
characters
yeah.
versus some characters you have to
Depending on story need or what.
just depending on story need write themselves along with the story. I
Okay.
think C.S. Lewis. I will actually use him twice in this because he talks about how just from just an idea in his head how sort of the story wrote and how sort of the character of Mr. Tumnus came along with his concept of the story. Like it just wrote itself in his head. Like there are characters like that, just characters appear, and then there are some characters who are going to have to be more directed, more contrived. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean contrived as in constructed. Like the thing is, though, I don't want to make it seem like there's one way to build a character. I think it really comes to more as having an idea for a character, and then it's developing that character, play them out. Because not every person in real life is going to be a deeper, complex person.
So do you start out with personality type or something different?
I usually like to start with I usually like to start with their relationship to the
That
story.
makes sense. Because certain people show certain sides of themselves in regard to certain people.
Yeah, I usually like to start with either a relationship or a conflict because there is one thing that I think is this is not always true, but it's almost always true, is that action shows character. So when action happens in a text, it um, it brings out the character. As in, like, this is something that I tend to do, and I know I said I would talk about Virginia Woolf, but this is one thing that I think she's able to pull off that a lot of authors who try to go with the same style don't. Is like very little happens often in Virginia Woolf texts, but a lot happens to the characters.
Do you mean in their head, like actually have their thoughts written out in dialogue, or like imply it through movement or
She
something?
has almost no dialogue. It's almost straight thought. It's just
Okay.
almost straight thought. There's almost no dialogue.
Do you like it better more like that, or like kind of like where the author essentially has to try harder by indicating it through nonverbal cues?
Um, I like Virginia Woolf. I think she's truly a master, but it is not the style that I would prefer or recommend or write in because I think, yes, stream of consciousness, I mean, she does amazing things with it, but I think I don't want to say it's better, but I think there is something more to showing a character in speech, movement, and thought. So so yes, I think I do enjoy when characters get in their own heads and start running with ideas and associations and free thinking and their own psyche, which is very, very interesting to deal with the conflicts inside themselves, but also that shows up like I say if you're not Virginia Woolf, it's very hard to do that without much action. You need action to bring that out. And I think that also just speaks more easily to readers, which is, there is you are ultimately writing for an audience, even if that's not your primary goal. The primary goal is to tell a story, but there is going to be an audience reading that. And for an audience to understand what the author is thinking, what the author is doing, what the author's trying to say, that comes out so much better when you have characters that are physical, mental, emotional, and physical, emotional, and physical, emotional, and spiritual and thinking people with agency, unless agency is being taken away for a specific reason. So, and then I've always had characters grow pretty organically. Start with a base idea. I like to answer questions about my characters, like give my character a questionnaire, sort of see how it goes. Usually, like association to things that are already created, like a song, a painting, a food, a smell, uh, sort of it helps classify, it helps physicalize them, it takes them out of the ether and into something more physical, which is helpful for capturing it. But there really is no one method to it, but I think a character should be a person, they should be a living person in a living world, unless for a specific reason they are not in a living world or they are not a living character. Like going back to Virginia Woolf, in The Lighthouse, Mr. Ramsay is a dead character. He's a deep character, but he is not a living character. He doesn't change. So, or even if you go back, sorry,
It's like a plaque. It's like his story has been written.
yes, his story has been written, and that is also part of his character, looking back on his legacy rather than looking forward. And then also we see, I think, in The Magician's Nephew with C.S. Lewis, we see living characters in a dead world, and then later dead characters in a living world. So there are. So that's not to say you should always write living characters in a living world, but that should be generally sort of your default operating form, your material plane. And so okay, so that is my rambling about characters. So
I have a interesting question. I'm going to coin
please.
a term right now.
Okay. Oh, we got a
What do
patent
you?
one.
Yeah. What do you think of this? I have to explain the business. What do you think of the whole idea of being a method writer? Like instead of having like a method actor, kind of getting yourself in a role. Like for me, it's like researching to death, like something that your character is really interested about,
Hmm.
being as knowledgeable almost as they are, and kind of like taking on their interests when writing them. I know that's hard, especially dealing with multiple main characters, but like you sort of know what I'm saying.
I do. I think researching what your characters are talking about and being knowledgeable about your topic is I think that's key because when you're writing a historical novel, you better be able to create a facsimile of that time. When you're writing a fantasy novel, you better have a question, you better have an answer for every question somebody's going to ask, even if it's not in the text. If you're writing a science fiction novel, you have to explain why you are living on Venus. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. I can definitely see being a method actor or even
Method writer.
yeah,
I know what
sorry,
you mean.
method writer. Um, Also, to continue that, I also think there's some benefit to being a, because technique is important, but technique alone is not gonna carry the day. Because writing is also kind of like a sport because you're competing with yourself. You're competing with the limits of your artistic ability.
No, I'd say so. Yeah.
So there is a natural
You're
amount
training
of
yourself. You're training
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, it takes training. So you have to work at the technique of it, but also there is something to the natural talent. Like Michael Jordan didn't just work hard at basketball. He was
Worked hard at
also
baseball too.
yes, he did, but he's also Michael Jordan.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like or it's like
He's like the John Cena of the '90s, just not as funny and not a
yeah,
meme.
it's like he is kind of mean though, but
Oh yeah.
like baseball pitchers work really hard, but not everybody is born with the ability to throw 90 miles an hour. So like that's kind of that. Yeah, I think definitely getting inside your character's head, doing playing a movie in your head and recording that down is a very popular sort of modern idea, and that can lead to over visualization, which is something that I know is at the creative writing club at our school. That's something that we've worked on the past 2 weeks is trying to escape the over visualization
You
of
mean
the
like
writing.
pretentiousness,
No,
taking too long on something?
no, focusing too much on visual characterization rather than using the other
Oh,
senses. So
okay.
that's the one drawback to the movie method, but the movie method works really well for plot driven things. Like things that are more like here's the story I'm telling you and here are the characters in it versus something more reflective, which is here are the characters, the plot's there and but it's really more about the characters.
So how do you do method writing?
How do I do method writing? When I basically I made a world many years ago, and then when a question came up, I answered the question and let that develop organically. And the world is still developing. There are still things I don't know about the world that like. There
You
are
have to
still
know, but yeah.
yeah, like there are still places. There are places that you know Tolkien made for Lord of the Rings that the reader was never intended to go. So
Which I'm kind of against because I think that's where a lot of people go overboard because like it's Keely's big thing is like why do they put like poems in the glossary that you never get to see? Like that's like it's a waste of paper at the very least.
well, then you're saying the poem just because it has no value to the story that it's associated with. Well, no direct value to the story that's associated with has no value, which I have a problem with. I have a problem with at least taking that line of reasoning towards its end. Well, perhaps that might be a bit melodramatic, but
I mean, to me, I would never do it just because of a time management perspective, which is funny because like I think I tend to go overboard on this, especially with the research, because like especially since I don't, I should just better like go through material, and I don't know like because sometimes I don't feel like I feel like I'm going to discover something in the research and like reframe the entire movie or book. So like, what is it for you? Is just like get the information, get out of there, or what? Oh, because this can have a big spectrum. Because like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, that took 10 years to make,
mm,
and it shows. It shows in quality. It's also a historical novel and a fantasy. So
drafting, there aren't too many first draft novels. I don't know if there's any. Come to think of it, I know there are
I
some.
think the guy who did Ray Bradbury did that a lot, but I could never do that.
James Joyce, I think one of James Joyce's might have been first
Yeah, Ray
draft.
Bradbury and James Joyce. There you go.
But for those of us who are not Ray Bradbury or James Joyce, which is to say everybody who's not Ray Bradbury or James Joyce, it takes a lot of drafts. Like my senior advisor was telling me that the second draft of my senior project is a massive improvement on my first one. She'd already thought that my first one was good. The second one was a big old improvement. But she was talking about what's her name, Barbara Kingsolver. Barbara Kingsolver. She said it took her 10, I read 9 or 10 novels to figure out how to write a novel. 9 or 10 published novels.
It doesn't mean she's bad either.
No, and Barbara Kingsolver is a very well-renowned author. She's a very good author. I don't, and I'm, she, I don't think she's somebody I agree with a lot for, like a philosophy. I definitely think I differ with her a lot, but she's an amazingly talented writer. I mean, if you ever read her, she wrote a really short piece of nonfiction about libraries, about the library and banned books. I can't remember the name of it.
Well, it doesn't matter, but
it's a fantastic fantastic little piece. Excuse my glugging. All right, so I think we can transition from you. This is all that was me spewing literary blarg. Let us hear from some internet literary blarg.
Well, you do have Twitter, so you could always post your thoughts there, or have a blog outside of Crypt Bunny.
Yes, Crypt Bunny. Hopefully, actually, seeing as how weather is going to be imposing tomorrow, not imposing. Weather's going to be impeding tomorrow. I am going to try and actually upload sort of an in-between video to actually talk about some game mechanic issues that involve me in a recent debate on Reddit.
Oh.
Yes.
So Crypt Bunny is going to be your site for streaming your videos and lore plus having RPG stuff in general? Or
yeah, I think it might be nice to expand into. I don't know how much further it'll expand, but I think it's a cool pathway because I've already given a lore video, and I would like to maybe give another lore video. But
probably give you subscribers, some hits there here and there.
It would be very nice to see what happens. We've grown a bit. I mean, I hope we get some of those people this way though, because that's a very narrow thing. This is a very broad thing. I feel like a lot of people could be interested. I think a lot of people who would be interested in that sort of thing would be very interested, especially in this conversation.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So talk to me about some of these Keelian ideals for these character building.
So the premise of Keely, I think, for writing this is that he found that there was a lot of the way that women were written was kind of backwards in fantasy. I really don't agree or disagree with this. I haven't really seen that inside of Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time. So do you feel that way? Because I think his point was that they'd get treated worse in speculative fiction because fantasy is even more male dominated. It's kind of more the nerdy, less social types. Is what he was getting at. But do you feel that? I ask you as also a person who has a main female character in your novel. But...
Yes, and as somebody who writes in speculative fiction, I think it really depends because I've come up against this as being a male author in a genre that is now all of a sudden very female biased. I'm not saying literally. I'm speaking demographically because because just recently, because I mean basically between our parents' generation and our generation, English went from being a more male dominated field to being a very heavily female dominated field.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of women professors that are coming to colleges in general now, and women lawyers, interestingly enough.
That kind of makes sense because I mean, it is, women are much more likely to do the liberal arts than male, especially in English, and
Makes sense.
yeah, that just is it is a demographic. That is something that I see because in the English department at my school, I am one of two. I am two out of about 20. There are two guys to 18 girls at a school that is pretty balanced, that is almost even in its general
Yeah,
population.
I think yeah, I mean I think the statistics for America, even though I can see it more in like India where it's like there's a lot of there's more of a middle class in India now, and there's a lot of English speakers now, and more women than there are men.
I mean, I mean, just globally, there are fewer men than women. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just kind of and that's now in more modern times that's started to show more in the workforce, in the academic, in graduation rates. Sorry, where was this going? But anyway, but being that I per, I have seen it, but I don't think it's something that is routinely praised or used in modernity with any kind of like, I don't see it in regular, because like, well, again, but this is all from my personal experience. The people I game with are mostly girls. The people I study
Yeah.
with are mostly girls. So I'm, my professors, my advisors, they're women. So at least that kind of literature is not stuff that I am exposed to, or things that would benefit like my, these personal, like, that's not something that I'm person. So I don't personally see it. I don't think it doesn't mean it's not there. I know that a
Yeah.
lot that I know that some fans, I know Tour is really pushing to have, look for female, specifically female minority fantasy authors, over other, people, which is, I mean, if you have a problem with that, I understand wanting that. I understand wanting new perspectives. Definitely, I understand that. But also, with that, that very specific search, I think you also close yourself out from getting other kinds of literature. From, there may be a new perspective that's, entirely independent of ethnic group or gender. You know, so I think narrowing that, I I think narrowing yourself from that is, it could be a problem if you're specifically looking for something, because I think historically we've kind of seen the example that if you're specifically looking for something to fill a hole, you're like, if like we have a gap and we want to fill it, we're going to focus entirely on filling it. That can be overwhelming. Like sometimes it works, but like, so at coming so again, so something that I haven't seen, but something that I do think exists, is that sort of in speculative fiction, the damsel in distress is something that endured far longer than in any other literary genres.
That's true.
And that to me, that is storytelling laziness, unless you're using it for a specific reason,
Yeah, to make a point.
to make a point. And though I do think that is becoming corrected, because of, based on demographics, though I would caution people from saying we need to absolutely focus on this, like we need to, we need to fill this, we need to hit this demographic, we need to get this demographic. I don't think that's the proper way to approach something like art or literature.
That being said, you think it's like just with the feeling of political correctness that maybe like some people are doing out of fear of like maybe offending someone or getting a special interest group onto them. I don't know.
I
Like bad
would
motivation.
I definitely wouldn't go that, I wouldn't go that far, because I truly want to, I truly think that people who are advocating for that believe that they want better literature, they want a wider range of literature, is what it's what I hope people think. Because if you're
That's
just,
what I want. Yeah,
yeah,
I agree
because
with
if
that.
you're just doing it to check a box, then I think you're really betraying the art, which is, but it is good to have a wider range of perspectives, definitely. But if you're just doing it if you're doing it out of fear, if you're doing it out of fear of offense, because I think art offends.
Yeah, definitely.
Art is something that will be offensive at times. It will be challenging at times, and that's a good thing. Generally a good thing. I won't say it's always a good thing, because I think there are definite examples of people who have used that to abuse the notion of art. But yeah, but yeah. So if you're doing it to check a box, then it's something that I don't applaud. But if you're saying, well, we really want to exclude, this group had sway for a long time. We want to exclude them. That that's not that's I don't think that's beneficial to the art. But if you're saying we want to include more people. We want we
Yeah,
want
I
to
understand.
we want to make a bigger tent for people in this genre. That's a great thing. I would be excited to see more of that. But the question is it there? Because not everybody's interested in writing that genre.
Well, I whether or not it's there, I have a little primer to make it happen and what it should look like. So
Interesting.
this this is basically all from J.G. Keely. It's from a series he called "Writing Strong Women."
Hmm.
Um, you'll find out how he defines the word strong. It's mostly to that point, and it's kind of random thoughts that I really liked. Anyone who's listening who's a Keely fan too, I recommend you read this in full. It's about like maybe the size of a short story. I just picked something that I thought was deep and kind of very unique to him. And
Hmm.
there's also a lot of links to articles that kind of agree with this point. So, and he's also kind of defends his points better in his comments, which
Hmm.
even though J.G. Keely, his comments can almost be as good as his actual main articles, which is that tells you how much he thinks about things and how consistently he does things. But one of the first points he made that jumped out at me was many authors mistake writing great female characters as writing female characters who are strong, meaning masculine. Strong to Keely should be expanded to include strong or weak of mind, and social role shouldn't determine this. So, like, if you have
Hmm.
a female soldier, that shouldn't automatically make her strong, and it shouldn't be necessarily, I think, making a point because like just like there are weak and strong male soldiers, like just for realism's sake, that you should just have it that way, if that makes
Right.
any sense.
No, that make that's common sense. I think it is because yeah, no, I can definitely see where that's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, like he kind of gave the example of how it weirded him out that in a lot of sitcoms they'll have like a character who's like a king be end up being like the person who runs the entire medieval fair, which I think I kind of understand where that's coming from because they're saying like he's just so narcissistic he made himself the king character, but it's like he gave the examples like well role doesn't equal personality necessarily. Especially like say go back to the soldier example that like instead of being a masculine person became a soldier, you just are a person who got drafted and in a country that does drafting still. And they can factor into your world building. There you go. If that
Interesting.
makes any sense. So, tequila sometimes tropes like the woman soldier become their own cliche because it operates on the psychology of okay, well, women have historically been X, so let's make her Y, and this is mere contrarianism to Keely. So, in other words, just because women have always been princesses in fairy tales doesn't mean making the knight will make it all better.
Yeah, no, I will say as a writer, I agree with that. I'd be very interested to hear what a female writer would think, but I'd like to think at least of the people that I know, I think people would definitely agree with that because that was again something that came up in recent Virginia Woolf talk was it is subverting is simply subverting the role making a strong character. No, because you have a very strong character. Again, sorry, to the lighthouse. Mrs. Ramsey. Mrs. Ramsey is not subverting any, part of it is the pressure that she has placed into her social role, but she is a strong character without being the knight, without being the knight,
Mm.
which is, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like, it's like glorifying her role, because it is both an appreciation and a critique of her gender role. But, sorry,
Which
carry
is
on.
funny because like Keely is like tends to be some have like postmodern and leftist points, but like honestly, that's a pretty unpostmodern thing. Is that like deconstruction can just devolve to, and I think there is actually like a part that postmodernism can play in a good way for deconstruction in
Mm,
fiction, but like too often than not, it's historical contrarianism.
mm. It is. No, I definitely agree with saying historically, and that's actually what I just said about about the seeking a specific, a specific subsection of a gender group for publishing fantasy is it's if you're excluding if you're saying, hey, this has classically been written by X, well, that's not okay. This needs to be written by Y. Then it's a bad thing. But it's saying, hey, we have X and Y. X is writing fantasy, and X will probably continue writing fantasy. So I think the question is more, why aren't that many why aren't that many Y writing fantasy? Okay, so to sort of rope back around, so going beyond that just contrarianism, what does sort of I'm assuming the point doesn't stop there. There's more.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have more notes.
Okay.
So building a strong women character can be more than spewing feminist rhetoric, especially their fictional world. So such ideas are rare and non-existent. So you're not going to have a Victorian housemaid saying how she needs to become a doctor because she wants to, even if that would be great for her. Like, you can indicate it in other points of the story in another way.
Indicate her personality or her desire to be a doctor, or simply
Well,
that she wouldn't desire to be a doctor.
you could just like show how hard, like for instance, to go back to my example, you could just show how horrible it is to be a maid back then and as a woman. You don't have to have telling her how awful she is. She could be okay with her condition in life, the way it's decided, but just the writing itself indicates, shows like, oh, this is awful,
without her having to say this is all, because
yeah,
to
basically,
to
yeah,
her that's just the way things are.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay, now that makes sense now. Well, that makes
I'm
sense
pretty sure that's what Keely was saying.
because a character who is going to be, like, uh you know even, take this anywhere, somebody, a human enslaved by dwarves.
Yes,
That's, they're not going to talk about, they might, at first think about, oh wow, this is terrible, but after a while, that's the way things are. you
yeah,
know
because they've been brainwashed, you know.
don't you know? Don't you know?
So
Canada.
we just can't get enough insulting those people, even in random times.
Oh, it's okay. I love to go to Canada and eat the hockey pucks and shoot the mooses through the goals.
So speaking of liberalism, no. So yeah, like what you're saying about treating women as equal characters, that Keely is a fan of the Bechdel test. It's basically the idea of
Yes.
women being together talking about something other than a man. Being alone together is not talking about this. Yeah, that's basically the shortest way of putting it.
Yeah, it's
So
it's basically how much time
treating
they
them like
talk
real
about.
characters, in other
Yeah, it's
words.
like how much time they talk about talk. Yeah, how much time they spend not talking about. I think it's straight domestic things, or something to that effect. No, it's not domestic things. What?
It's not a man or not domestic things. Like, I
Okay.
think.
Okay. Of course. Then again, of course. Then again, the one problem with the Bechdel test is I think it really depends on the subject matter of the story. Though I very much like the idea behind it. But the one thing is, I think it does depend on the nature of the story. Like, for example, if you're dealing with something like, I'm gonna say like something like, what about like Downton Abbey? In Downton Abbey, almost everybody spends a lot of time talking about domestic issues. You know?
That makes us just because it's equal to everyone, because it goes back to the lot in life thing.
Well, yeah, that would be the corollary to that, is, because the men talk a lot about domestic issues.
So I
Yes,
think we need more of a modern day application rather than like, especially if you have a more gendered society.
yeah, like The Devil Wears
And I think the
Prada.
point was men anyway, talking about men when alone. So
Or would be talking about women. Well, no, no, I guess it doesn't flip for men.
no, because the point is that men would
Right.
never treat this such unfair treatment. So it's time for women to get such treatment as well.
Intriguing.
Yeah.
I actually like the Bechdel test.
Yeah,
So
I guess I do too. I see no problem with it.
it is a very we I actually came across this couple semesters ago when we were talking about The Devil Wears Prada, because that is supposed to be one of the best Bechdel test movies. Is.
Oh yeah, because it does it for entire minutes on end. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
probably the first 10 minutes, if that.
yeah. No, it was. which is interesting because it was interesting to see very much how it was funny actually in the honors group at my school, the one male professor took up a much more hardline feminist stance than any of the women professors, which I thought was actually very interesting about that movie. So
I mean, yeah, I tend not to be like very hard nosed about things, especially since like sometimes I just like someone else to like a female like niceness to things sometimes. I mean, not all women are the same, but just they tend to like when in a group, they tend to like calm things down. Like at my school, one time, like I was playing football and like a girl just decided to join in. I was just like, okay, whatever. Like more the merrier.
well, that is interesting because Virginia Woolf, again back to the lighthouse, talks about that sort of like what is Mr. Ramsay's great selfish desire? It's for approval. It's for comfort. Is that sort of his? He longs for what he associates as a female comfort from his wife,
Male
and
power, male power fantasy.
it kind of. But what do I describe as a power? I don't know, but he is very much like that. A lot of his relationship with his wife is revolving around he wants that fulfillment, which I think is, I think part of Virginia Woolf's point was that men are wrong to want that. I don't necessarily know if that's true though. I don't know because there's also the dean of our English department. She's an excellent professor, but she was talking about sort of like we can as much as we talk about changing gender roles, there has been the historical trend of basically men go and discover something and it doesn't turn into something until women show up. It's kind of like the men went out and discovered it and then the women made the civilization out of it. Which is I don't know how much truth there is to that. I mean
I can see that
it's
though.
at least an interesting idea. And of
Someone
course
should go look it up.
that
Leave
would be
a comment,
really interesting.
viewers.
That would actually be really interesting. And uh, there is something to that because I know at least as a male, I do experience that too. Like when I'm in need of when I'm in need of comfort, even even not a romantic sense, I will tend to be like, oh, female. Like I don't know. That just seems to. I thought that was something that was.
It could be a social construct too. I'm totally open to that because I know
It could
more
definitely be.
men try to be polite around women, including myself. Like I try to not. If there's a girl I like, I put on body spray and stuff, and I won't around men.
I truly
I can be more
apologize to the women.
rude.
I apologize to the women of the world for acts. I just apologize. Period. For sorry, continuing. No, that is there was a very interesting thing is because I played soccer for a
Oh yeah.
long time, but
Wait, you run in co-ed soccer?
yeah, actually
Oh,
our league was co-ed the last 2 years, but it was so funny because there was at least there was that sort of there was that awkwardness to it where there is there was this girl and nobody would get near her because nobody wanted to in any way harm or threaten. So I think so I don't know that's the question, is that purely a social thing or is that an actual ingrained thing as part of being a male. I mean, I'm sure not all men because you have
yeah, is it biological? I
you have
think.
many. Yeah, I think men are more likely to be physically abusive and whatnot. But is there in at least a well-adjusted or a fairly well-adjusted male, is there an inherent desire to protect? Because I don't know, is that a raised thing or a nature versus nurture? And the truth is I don't know. I legitimately don't know, and I'd be very interested to hear what people have to think about it because to me this is a whole big mystery because
Yeah,
it's so funny when my
yeah. I mean, like,
girlfriend has to explain to me like female her perspective as a woman. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I totally see that, or at least I definitely see that side of things, or but a lot of times like I had never thought of that way. I don't think about my body that way. I don't think about my surroundings that way. And is that a natural thing or is that part of our culture? And I don't know. I'm fascinated by it, but I also get weirded out by it because people get really really nasty about it if you don't agree with them. Definitely both ways. People get
I
very
think
aggressive.
like for me, like I think also women make great counselors to a large degree too. Part of it.
I mean, I don't necessarily know if that if it's an inherent thing of being better, but again, that is a demographics thing because the
Yeah.
and again, is the demographics thing a
Yeah.
natural thing or a cultural thing?
Yeah, this is kind of skipping away to my last point, but I said like
Yeah.
I think some of this exists. These problems exist because most fiction was historically written by men. Not only
Yes.
were women were illiterate and not rich enough or had the free time to read, because everyone was basically a farmer anyway. So most people couldn't know how to write or had the free time to write or the wealth to write.
Medieval problems,
Yes.
Renaissance problems, even.
Oh yeah, even 19th century problems for most of the world. If you think about it,
Yeah,
it's kind of
yeah, no,
amazing how we got here.
that's even beyond, I would say, beyond, the developed, like the well-developed nations, that's even still a problem.
And communism, like you were educated, but you're so censored for like most of the 20th century, it didn't matter. Like half the
Yeah,
pop.
but yeah, socialism, communism, the dictatorships, sort of throughout, the southern, especially the southern hemisphere. But like, can you imagine like the art that didn't get made?
Okay. Well, even in like the Soviet Union, honestly, like they even made movies that then, so I definitely know what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like even under government control, there was Russian culture. I mean, it's fun
Russian
and weird,
culture,
and
Russian
scary.
culture is interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be
It's,
interesting. Future episode idea: totalitarian art.
that'd be a great
That
site.
that'd be a really interesting one. But
But anyway, another problem I saw was
mhm.
that I'm trying to look at my notes. Oh, I also wrote down because women are talking about how women are psychologically different. I think that also my last point is yeah, like sexual traits, like sex specific traits, aren't always like correctly perceived. And I think that's because like number one, I just know for most men, or at least most American men I know, they tend not to be on the more social side, and they don't like apprehend human nature as well, or as well as women do. Like women writers, like they're some of my best characterization writers. Like the best male writers I have haven't been the best characterization writers. And I think that also because like psychology is a young science, and even most people I know don't know how to use it correctly,
Mm,
including men and women. So it's like they kind of contributes to like bad female characterization again.
interesting. Well, I would say that I think Virginia Woolf wrote a better male character than most male writers will ever write in their lifetime, while also, writing, really excellent. And so, I think there is a struggle. I think to at least write beyond your own sort of genders. Like one thing I noticed in my earlier writing is I noticed that there was, that there were either like some like I did note, like I think this thing I've corrected over time, but when I was first, starting, I'm like looking at this character. This character is,
In your writing?
yeah, like this character
Okay.
is strong because they're like a man, not because they're an actual strong character. This character is, in the case of one character, this character is overly sexualized. This character is just flat out.
You know that you're aware of it.
Yeah, it's something that I've become aware of, and I have, I think, I do believe fixed. But yeah, no, I think though, I think those criticisms, I know I have my differences with Mr. Keely, but those are very legitimate criticisms.
Consider yourself all the more have a Keelian education.
He
But
he.
there's one more thing I'd like to add.
Sure.
I think that I do think that genius is rare, but like
Mm,
there will be a lot of pre-psychology writers, especially men writers, who got women very well without like having to use psychology. Like
interesting.
I I don't know. I really can't think of a very good I can't really think of any good specific female characters, but like John Milton, Shakespeare. I mean, like I never thought like, oh, like this guy, he's pre-psychology, he's pre-science, he's just no good.
Hmm.
Um, I can't
Yeah.
I can't appreciate like what he's doing, but like I never thought that. So I don't. I think at the end of the day, you can't like say, oh, this they don't know psychology. Like no, they can still like they're so responsible basically.
Shakespeare was pre-psychology.
Yeah, exactly. But he's great. Like, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah, which I
And he's a
think,
genius. He's a super genius. And then he's
yeah,
probably pretty social to know what the heck people are like.
yeah, which is interesting because that to me is one of the is as much as I really find sort of Freud's framework to things fascinating. That is a pretty big blow, I think, to psychoanalytic. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
even though it would be talking about subconscious, which is something that wouldn't go away. But to me, that is a problem that you have to answer: is how well were people able to interpret each other without that framework?
And do you know what? I don't know why this is, and I know you have mental stuff though, but like I noticed that like a lot of writers that they kind of like are different from like the writers now. They never had any formal training. I'm not saying you can't succeed with like a
Mm-hmm.
doc, like a whatever you want, a master's in English.
Yep.
They're like Dunsany was a soldier, Tolkien was a soldier, like Lewis was a soldier. Like today, you never think like, oh, there's some guys at an army base. They must all be fantasy writers. You never think that today.
Or think about the great poets who came out of the First World War. The
Yeah, like army guys. Like today,
Yeah.
you never like, oh, yeah, no, that's the guy who'd be like, he'd be working at a gym or like a construction
Hmm.
site, not like a writer.
Specialization. The same reason Mark Zepchinski had a major league career. That's what it's hyper specialization. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm not a fan, I guess.
I like the idea of being a Renaissance person, Renaissance man is kind of the classic thing, but why not make it Renaissance people? Everybody can have a Renaissance. Woohoo! Okay. But
So, other than some niche points, that's all I have to say about women characters. But I recommend you read the whole thing, but consider yourself educated.
cool. Also, read. It is painful, but read "To the Lighthouse" by Virginia Woolf if you really want to talk about watch an author get super well into the psyches of both male and female characters while dealing with both their roles, but also sort of innate traits that seem to be part of them.
How long is it?
It's about 240 pages.
Oh, maybe
It can
summer.
it can be it is brilliant. It is beautiful. It is haunting, but it can also be very brutal to read, and the plot is nothing to write home about. But but that's not the point. The plot is not the point. The characters are the point. So
Like Curtis Grown.
yes. So
I should love gothic novels too.
yes, gothic. Well, sort of gothic versus like mid modern, but still. So do you have questions for me?
Yes.
All right.
So you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Who is your J.G. Keeley?
Who is my JG? That's actually really interesting because I have been questing for sort of a literary uh, genre to call home, sort of a literary genre.
So you're
Like
looking at romanticism and gothicism, or what?
those would be the genres I like to write in. I like
Oh, okay.
I like I like romanticism. I like the subdivision of Gothicism. I'm also very interested by modernist, especially early modernists. Like I like Virginia Woolf and T.S. Eliot. I'm very interested by them. Uh, but I would say primarily it is. But like I'm talking about like sort of like my critical when we're talking about like my J.G. Kelly, like my critical person.
Your
I don't.
critical school.
Yeah, my critical school. I'm actually still searching for it. That's the one thing.
So you think it's not going to be a single person? It's going to be
Yeah,
like
it's
a
something more of a school. I know I am not a formalist.
Okay,
I
that's fair. I
I,
can
I
see
know
that.
for sure I am not a formalist. Um, Other than that, I really like Freudian theory applied to literature. Also, Freud had some seriously screwed up ideas about women.
Oh,
Like
yeah, he
like
was. Oh,
like I don't believe in like Freud's psychology, but I think
yeah.
his theory applied to literary criticism and sort of at least at its base level to literature, the idea of the three competing parts of the psyche. And I actually think there's a lot of valid, and the symbolism, the subconscious of the author, as long as it's used responsibly and not taken to absurd limits to say absurd things that don't match up biographically with the writer. I think there's actually an excellent I think it's actually an excellent gateway into a work of fiction. So that's the one I'm kind of most comfortable with. I would say formalism is the one I'm least comfortable with, but though like Freud had some good ideas, Freud was also pretty crazy. So like
He did drugs.
there are a lot of
He did.
weird, nasty stuff that Freud
He did
says.
cocaine. He did
Yes, he
cocaine.
did.
A lot of people did cocaine, but he did. he actually wrote about how good it was.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, he said some really, like truly like misogynistic things about women.
Oh,
But oddly enough, he and his wife had a really good relationship by like almost all records. So
wow.
what do I know? But okay, so
I thought you were gonna say like maybe for a single person like Matthew Colville or something.
uh, he's another interesting. I think he's a very interesting person. You guys should people should pop over to see Matt Colville talk about literature and ideas. He's an interesting guy. Again, not somebody I agree with on everything, uh, but he has. I don't think he does himself due credit as a philosopher and critic.
So he underrates himself.
I do think so, and I think that is also part of the being on YouTube. Oh, it's great philosophy. Who puts great philosophy on YouTube? Who puts
Everyone.
who we
Well,
we try.
yes.
We try.
Could you point to a specific personage of J.J. Keely or not even that?
Not yet, but I'm working towards it.
You think you'll discover them? Okay,
Hopefully I will. I would say as a critic, I do trust. I do think Verlin Flieger. When it
is
comes
she
to,
American? Is she German or something?
I couldn't tell. I'm pretty sure she's American.
Okay,
Uh,
I don't know.
her last
Because
name
you're
is
talking about German metamodernism. That's why I'm saying.
very interesting. She's primarily a Tolkien critic, but she also does other stuff. But she's not somebody I think who has a wide range of application. But I think she's one of the most. Um, um, I'm not even really sure what school she is from. I think she's more historical
Hmm.
or biographical. She's definitely textual, but she also definitely examines the person behind the text.
Okay.
I think she's a good critic, but again, she's very narrow in her focus.
Oh,
But I think she's an excellent read. She's also very easy to read, which is something rare in criticism.
okay. Do you have a question for
I
me?
do indeed. So I was going to ask you is when it comes to your application, so when it comes to your definitely your sort of critical focus on J.G. Keeley,
Yes.
if you could say if you had like 3 sentences to tell someone about why you thought his notions of literature were so valuable, what would you say?
I would start off with like saying how like he's very knowledgeable about psychology and how like basically someone's especially like if JJ Keeley you can't really like you can't mess with him like you can't you can't nonsense him like he's like if someone has like a wrong head psychology not only will he capture that but he'll just pull them apart. If you look at his review of I'd also recommend them to the his review of I'm trying to remember what is The Giver. I think he kind of like overdoes like ranting against it, but it's basically a litany of insults. Like it's really like one sentence insult, drop down one line, one sentence insult, drop down one line insult. I think it's overdone, but he really gets there is he just and another thing is he seems to sum up literally everything wrong or everything right in a book in as little words as possible, yet hitting basically everything.
Okay,
Most everything.
so the condensation
Yes.
and popularization of critical idea.
Yeah, I guess he puts it in a digestible format.
Digestibility is huge because I think that is something that I.
He's not very funny by modern standards because he doesn't really focus on shock humor. Like
Uh,
you'd be surprised how little he swears.
that's fine by me.
I mean, what I'm saying is you could never have him go on like I don't know Comedy Central and like people would like come in with him clapping or
When
anything.
was Comedy Central actually funny?
I don't know.
All
That's a
right.
good point though.
Well, I think that is about gonna do us for
I do have
tonight.
one more
Oh, you
question.
do have one more question? Okay, sure. Fire
Yeah,
away.
I'll make it quick. What is your overall opinion on Adventure Time?
My overall what in Adventure Time?
Opinion.
Opinion. It's a fun show. I'm not sure it's as high-minded as some people think it is, but I think it is an ambitious show, and I personally enjoy it. I think people tend to be a little bit divided on whether it's, you know, a good show, a great show, or nothing special. I tend to be part of the it's a good, probably very good show, but I don't know if I'd call it great.
Well, there's 10 scenes to slog through, and I heard it, and now it's completed. Like you could kind of like review it as an entire thing. And I heard that every season, but apparently six, because it kind of focuses on side characters, kind of like works. But it kind of got darker and more story driven as it went on. I don't know.
I do say I do enjoy the show. I like it, or at least I haven't seen it in a long time, but I liked it quite a lot.
Apparently, the writers trying to make it based it off of like D&D, like how they
Yeah,
wrote it or something like that.
yeah, it is loosely.
It feels like that.
It does feel like that, and, and yeah, no, it did work. It was a show that worked well in its time. So I actually do have one quick question for you.
Yes.
When it comes to literature, what do you think is the closest non-literature parallel to literature? Like, what sort of art, pursuit, sport, hobby you think is the closest to literature?
It could take me a while.
Yeah, no.
Maybe plays because like unlike movies, there's easier to control things, and you can have like I see kind of more like an art house audience there, at least like in modern day. Like it's more likely you'll see an avant-garde play just as how cheaply they're produced there. Like what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Maybe
I think I
theater.
do.
Maybe.
Yeah, theater. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much. That was an interesting session, possibly controversial. I don't know how this was going to get received. So, all right. Well, thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful night. And I hope nobody shows up to our house with pitchforks. All right.
Canadian pitchforks made in Canada.
Made in Canada. All right. Good night, everybody.